Never defend yourself. Jung and Machiavelli's rule of ruthless power. You think defending yourself makes you look strong, but in reality, it makes you look guilty. You explain. You justify. You try to clear things up. But the more you talk, the more they question you. The more you clarify, the more they doubt you. And in that moment, something terrifying happens. You've already lost. Not because you're wrong, not because you're weak, but because you entered the game on their terms. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And Machiavelli? He didn't defend. He didn't explain. He didn't seek approval. He understood something most people never will. When you defend yourself, you give away power. Let me ask you this. Have you ever felt misunderstood and instantly jumped to defend yourself? You crafted the perfect explanation. You poured your heart out to clarify your real intentions. You stayed up at night thinking, maybe if I just explain better, they'll finally get me. But they didn't. Because here's the harsh truth. People don't believe explanations. They believe energy. And the moment you explain, you shift the frame from power to permission, from self-possession to seeking approval, from solid to shaky. You didn't fix the misunderstanding. You just confirmed it. You see, when you defend, even with the best intentions, you signal something deeper than words. I need you to validate me. And the person across from you, they feel it. They don't see strength. They smell insecurity. They see a chink in your armor. This isn't a flaw in you. It's a flaw in the strategy. We've been taught to be nice, to talk it out, to always explain, always make peace, always defend. But what if I told you that's not maturity? It's programming. A script designed to keep you compliant, soft, predictable. And every time you obey that script, you get smaller. You lose leverage. You hand them the power to define you. Because in the game of perception, the first to justify is the first to lose. And Machiavelli, he never played by those rules. He mastered something deeper. And so did Jung. Because both men, in their own ways, understood the same brutal truth. When you explain who you are, you give people permission to believe otherwise. So what's the alternative? That's what we'll explore in this video. Not through theory, but through the psychology of silence, the leverage of non-response, and the forgotten wisdom of shadow power. This isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming clear. Because true strength doesn't need to explain. Let's go deeper. Why do we defend ourselves? Why do we need others to understand us so badly that we give up our dignity in the process? Carl Jung would say, what you resist not only persists, but grows in size. And here's what we resist most: being misunderstood. We can tolerate being ignored. We can endure being disliked. But being misunderstood, that gets under our skin like nothing else. Why? Because it threatens the persona, the image we've carefully built. You see, from a young age, we're trained to present a polished version of ourselves to the world. It starts with our parents. Be good. Say sorry. Don't be rude. Be nice, even when you're upset. So we learn to smile when we're angry, stay quiet when we're hurt, and explain constantly just to maintain connection. That, according to Jung, is how the persona is born. It's the social mask, the acceptable self, the one who explains, justifies, and defends, all to remain safe and seen. But here's the paradox. The more you defend the persona, the more you lose the self. Because behind the persona is something far more raw, more real, and more powerful. Jung called it the shadow. The part of you that doesn't care about being liked. The part of you that values truth over harmony. The part of you that could walk away from anyone without flinching. But you've buried that part. You've labeled it rude, aggressive, too much. So now, when someone challenges you, you don't access strength. You access anxiety. You jump to defend. Not because you're wrong, but because you're afraid of being seen as bad. And that fear? It makes you predictable, controllable, harmless. Exactly what Machiavelli warned against. Because Machiavelli believed it is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. But here's the twist. He wasn't talking about violence. He was talking about presence. The kind of presence that doesn't explain itself, that doesn't seek validation, that doesn't need approval to act. The kind of presence that walks into a room and changes the temperature. You can't develop that presence if you're constantly defending your image. You can't access that power if every critique feels like a threat to your identity. And you definitely can't lead, in life, in business, in relationships, if you need everyone to understand where you're coming from. Because here's the Machiavellian truth. The one who defends, kneels. And every time you kneel in words, you shrink in the minds of others. People don't remember what you said. They remember the energy behind it. They remember whether you stood firm or tried to sound nice. And when you explain too much, something dark happens. They stop listening. They start assessing. They wonder, why is he trying so hard to explain? Why does she seem so desperate to be understood? What's he hiding? Your words don't clear your name. They cloud it. And here's where psychology meets strategy. The more you try to fix perception, the more you confirm suspicion. So what's the alternative? You learn the lost art of strategic silence. You don't rush to clarify. You don't fall into reactive defense. You let the misunderstanding sit, if it must, because your energy speaks louder than your defense ever could. So if defending yourself is a trap, what do you do when someone disrespects you, spreads lies about you, twists your words, misjudges your character? You do what feels unnatural at first. You stop playing the game. You don't clarify. You don't explain. You don't fight to be seen accurately. Because here's the twist Jung and Machiavelli would both agree on. The person who needs to be understood has already placed their self-worth in the hands of others. And that is the most dangerous position you can be in. Because the moment you give someone the power to define you, you also give them the power to confine you. Let me give you a truth most people aren't ready for. Not everyone deserves the full explanation of who you are. In fact, most people won't even hear it. They're too busy defending their own illusions, too distracted by their projections, too afraid to admit they were wrong about you. Carl Jung said, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of other people." If someone misjudges you, and you know who you are, you don't need to fight the darkness. You simply let it collapse under its own weight. You become what Machiavelli admired most, a man of presence, not persuasion, someone who leads by stance, not speech, someone who lets reality prove their value, not reputation management, someone who uses the silence of self-trust as a sword. This isn't weakness. It's dominance of a higher order. Because what is more terrifying than someone who doesn't flinch when misunderstood? Someone who doesn't rush to correct the lie? Someone who doesn't beg to be believed? Someone who simply lets truth echo in time? You see, the strongest people don't fight perception. They outlive it. They don't explain their greatness. They embody it. And that is what makes them untouchable. Not loud, not defensive, not argumentative, but inevitable. Because here's the final twist Machiavelli understood. He who builds his power on perception will live in fear, but he who builds it on reality becomes unshakable. So ask yourself this: do you want to be understood, or do you want to be undeniable? Because you can't be both. One requires words, the other requires embodiment. One bends to the crowd, the other walks alone. One keeps you chasing, the other keeps you calm. When you stop defending yourself, you don't become cold, you become clear. And in that clarity, you reclaim the power that was always yours. Someone accuses you of something absurd, maybe at work, maybe online, maybe even in your family. You know it's not true, but the room is quiet. Everyone looks at you. They're expecting you to defend, to protest, to scramble for clarity, but instead, you pause, you look, you say nothing, not because you're weak, but because you're watching who believes the lie without question. Because in that moment, you're not just dealing with false accusation. You're conducting a psychological audit. You see who needs drama to feel important, who believes rumors faster than history, who's comfortable with you only when you're explaining yourself. And most importantly, you see who's never truly known you. This is where the power of strategic silence begins. Machiavelli wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." But he wasn't talking about cruelty. He was talking about certainty, presence, the kind that does not beg to be seen, but demands to be felt. And what is more powerful than someone who doesn't flinch in the face of falsehood? Think of the greatest leaders in history, the ones who built empires, who shook entire systems. They didn't waste breath defending their every move. They acted and let results speak. They let time be their lawyer and silence be their sword. Because here's a hidden truth Carl Jung hinted at. A man who cannot bear being misunderstood has not yet met himself. Why? Because when you truly know who you are, you no longer trade self-respect for public approval. You stop needing to correct every misconception. You stop pouring truth into cups that are already full of their own narratives. You stop bleeding energy in battles you never chose. Instead, you become the mirror. When people throw false words at you, they're only revealing their own projections. They show you their envy, their confusion, their fear of your stillness. And that's the real psychological trick. Silence forces others to hear themselves. It's uncomfortable. It's disorienting. It breaks the rhythm of emotional manipulation. They expect your panic, your justifications, your over-explanations. But what they get is your unshaken presence. And suddenly, they're left to battle with their own echo. Because when someone says something untrue and you don't react, the room changes. People notice. Some will think you're guilty. But the wise ones, they start to question the accuser. Why is he so calm if it's true? Why does she look so unaffected? Maybe we got it wrong. And that is how perception becomes leverage. Not through shouting, not through self-defense, but through mastery of your energy. Have you ever wondered why you feel the urge to explain yourself, even when no one asked? Why, after being misunderstood, you lie awake at night, replaying the conversation, crafting the perfect comeback, even though the moment has long passed? That's not logic. That's not maturity. That's not even insecurity. That is the shadow. Carl Jung called it the hidden self, the parts of you you've exiled, the instincts you suppress, the rage you swallowed, the clarity you silenced, in exchange for approval. The shadow is not evil. It's not dangerous. It's honest. It holds the version of you that remembers how many times you were punished, not for being wrong, but for being real. As a child, you were scolded for talking back. As a student, you were told to stay in line. At work, you were told to be team player, even when your ideas were stolen. In relationships, you were told not to overreact, even when your needs were ignored. So you learned. Silence equals survival. Politeness equals safety. Niceness equals love. And in that equation, the real you was buried. So now, decades later, when someone questions your worth, accuses you unfairly, or doubts your competence. It's not just their words you hear. You hear your mother's disapproval, your teacher's cold stare, your ex's gaslighting, your boss's dismissal. And the shadow? It rises, not in anger, but in panic. Please see me. Please understand I'm not bad. Please don't leave. So you over-explain, over-apologize, over-perform, not because you want clarity, but because you're chasing a ghost. But here's the bitter truth. You can't heal the past by fixing the present. Every time you defend yourself to someone who's not truly listening, you're not talking to them. You're talking to the version of you that still feels small, unseen, and afraid. That's the shadow, pulling the strings behind your reactions. Carl Jung warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And this is exactly what happens when you feel compelled to justify yourself. It's not about them. It's about the part of you that never got to say, I don't owe you an explanation. You see, when your shadow remains unintegrated, your worth becomes fragile. It can be threatened by a glance, shaken by a rumor, destroyed by a passive-aggressive comment, because deep down, you don't fully believe in yourself yet. And when belief is missing, you try to borrow credibility by being understood. But here's the paradox. The more you beg to be understood, the less people respect what you say. Because people don't follow words, they follow energy. And energy is clearest when it's whole. The person who's at peace with being misunderstood, that's the person you don't dare play with. Not because they're mean, but because they know who they are, with or without your validation. If Carl Jung warned us about the cost of an unhealed shadow, then Niccolo Machiavelli showed us the strategic advantage of mastering it. Because while Jung looked inward, Machiavelli looked outward. He wasn't interested in emotions. He studied power, how it's gained, how it's lost, and most importantly, how it's perceived. And here's what he discovered. Never defend yourself. Never explain. Because in politics and life, the explanation becomes your confession. You see, when you explain yourself, you validate the premise of the accusation. You say, this is worth responding to. But Machiavelli played a different game. Let's say someone accuses you of being manipulative. If you jump in to explain, you confirm their control of the frame. But if you ignore or redirect, you stay in control of perception. Because in the game of power, frame is everything. The person who defines the frame defines the outcome. And Machiavelli knew, the moment you defend, you've already agreed to the other person's terms. So what did he do? He redirected the narrative. He didn't fight rumors. He created distractions. He built alliances. He acted decisively, while others debated morality. He understood that people don't want truth. They want confidence, direction, a story that makes sense, even if it's not entirely accurate. And the one who gives them that story wins. Now, let's be clear. Machiavelli wasn't suggesting dishonesty for its own sake. He was pointing to something deeper. That power is never about facts. It's about framing facts to your advantage. And here's how that applies to you. Next time you're misjudged, don't defend. Observe. Who's attacking? Why now? What frame are they creating? Then, instead of reacting emotionally, respond strategically. Don't say, I'm not like that. Instead, do something that renders their frame irrelevant. If they say you're incompetent, go win quietly. If they say you're arrogant, offer silent grace. If they say you're fake, disappear, then return more powerful. Let your actions shift the perception, without ever acknowledging the attack. This is not cowardice, it's control. Because once you start justifying yourself to critics, you've accepted their judgment as valid, and worse, you've stepped off your throne, just to argue with peasants. You become reactive, predictable, easy to manipulate. But when you hold frame, when you refuse to descend into petty explanation, you terrify them. Because now, they don't know what you're thinking. They don't know if their words affected you. They don't know if you're planning something bigger. And that ambiguity, that silence, it becomes your armor. Machiavelli once said, "Men should be either treated generously or destroyed, because they take revenge for slight injuries. For heavy ones they cannot." Which means, don't engage unless you're ready to win completely. Don't defend. Don't argue. Don't dilute your presence with justification. Either respond with power, or don't respond at all. Because the one who remains calm when accused, the one who smiles while misunderstood, the one who doesn't flinch when insulted, that's the one people start to fear. Not because they're dangerous, but because they're unshakable. The modern battlefield, social media, misunderstanding, and the art of non-response. We're no longer in Florence. This isn't a court full of dukes, spies, and papal alliances. Today, your battlefield is a glowing screen. Your reputation isn't destroyed in the castle halls. It's shredded in the comment sections. It's twisted by quote tweets. It's stabbed by someone who barely knows you, but retweeted a stranger's opinion as gospel. And here's the terrifying truth. You don't have to do anything wrong anymore to be crucified. Just be too quiet, too confident, too different from the tribe. And boom, someone labels you. Narcissist, fake guru, toxic, problematic. Pick your poison. Then comes the mob. Pitchforks disguised as emojis. Executions served in comment threads. Trial by algorithm. And your first instinct? Let me clear this up. Let me explain what I meant. Let me show them I'm not what they say. Pause. Breathe. You're being pulled into the arena of the powerless. Because here's the game. Once you respond, you've already lost. You've validated the accuser. You've joined their frame. You've said, "Your opinion of me matters more than my energy, my clarity, my peace." Carl Jung would call this shadow exposure. The moment the world sees your desperate need to be liked, they smell blood. And Machiavelli? He would say you've just abdicated your throne and handed it to the peasants. Because in the modern world, the real king is the one who remains still while chaos screams. Let the wolves bark, let the crowd gossip, let the narrative twist. You stay quiet. Not because you have no answer, but because you refuse to answer to noise. And when you do that, you transcend the game. Because what they want is your attention. What they fear is your detachment. Here's what happens when you don't defend. The wave crashes, but you're not there to be pulled under. The noise fades, and people start to question the outrage itself. Most importantly, your brand, your name, your presence becomes mystery. And in the digital age, mystery is magnetic. Mystery builds legend. Legend builds power. And power doesn't beg for acceptance. So next time your screen lights up with hate, slander, misrepresentation, don't play defense. Play distance. Your silence becomes strategy. Your stillness becomes sharpness. Your refusal becomes your reign. Power in the age of noise. How to let them talk while you rise. Most people think power is about volume. Louder voice, longer thread, more explanations, more proof that you're not what they say. But real power is signal, not noise. It's not the one who talks the most. It's the one everyone talks about, but who never needs to talk back. Carl Jung understood why this is so hard for you. He said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." So instead of sitting with discomfort, you try to silence it with clarification. You try to fix the external story, hoping it'll fix the internal pain. But here's the brutal truth. Defending yourself rarely changes their mind. It only proves you're afraid they're right. That's the trap. When you rush to correct the record, to explain yourself, to appease the critics, you're not fixing the truth. You're showing your own insecurity. Because if you really believed your truth, you wouldn't need them to believe it too. Jung would say this is the persona in panic. The social mask is being threatened. So, it panics. It wants to protect your reputation, your image, your role in the group. But the more you fight for that mask, the more you disconnect from your true self. And Machiavelli? He never trusted the crowd. He wrote, "The mob is fickle. They love you today and stone you tomorrow. So why would you let your energy rise and fall based on their ever-changing opinion?" He believed in something more powerful than defense: distraction. When they attack you for one thing, don't explain. Do something greater elsewhere. Let them talk. You're building your empire. You're launching your next move. You're aligning with stronger allies. You're sharpening your strategy behind closed doors. And by the time they realize you never responded, you're already 10 steps ahead. That's not silence. That's control. That's Machiavellian focus. Because the wise don't waste time fighting back. They build forward. They let perception play its game, while they play reality. They let the rumors swirl, while they own the results. So here's your challenge. The next time someone throws dirt on your name, don't clean it up. Build a tower so high the dirt can't reach you. That's how legends are made, not by arguing, but by ascending. Stillness is the sharpest blade. Why silence cuts deeper than defense. There's a kind of silence that feels weak, passive, powerless. The silence of someone who doesn't know what to say. But there's another kind of silence. It's not confusion. It's calculation. Not fear, but focus. It's the silence of someone who could speak, but doesn't need to. That's the silence that makes kings nervous. It's the silence of command. Because silence, when chosen consciously, is not a lack of defense. It is the defense. Jung would say this is the moment when the self has integrated the shadow. You're no longer reacting to the attack, because you've already faced the parts of you that used to be triggered by it. You've made peace with your rage. You've accepted your flaws. You've seen the parts of yourself that aren't perfect, and you've owned them. And once you've done that, what can they possibly say to shake you? What insult could reach a man who's already looked into his own abyss and survived? That's why defending yourself becomes unnecessary. You're no longer protecting a persona. You're standing as a self. And when a true self stands in stillness, everything else trembles. That's the depth Machiavelli understood when he said, "It is not titles that honor men, but men that honor titles." In other words, power isn't something you defend. It's something you embody. You don't need to say, "I'm strong." You walk in, and the room already knows. You don't need to yell, "That's not true." You smile, and let the results whisper louder than any rumor. Because people can argue with your words. They can twist your statements. They can misquote your message. But they can't distort the silence of presence. They can't fake the weight you carry. They can't copy the steadiness in your eyes when they expect panic and see peace. This is what both Jung and Machiavelli knew. The most dangerous man is the one who doesn't flinch when you misunderstand him. The most respected woman is the one who holds her center, while others spiral. The most unshakable leader is the one who answers insults with movement, not explanation. So here's the final truth. You don't need to be louder. You don't need to fight harder. You just need to stop shrinking every time someone doubts you. Silence doesn't mean surrender. It means the war is already won, inside you. And that is the kind of silence the world remembers. If this video woke something up inside you, don't rush to comment. Don't try to explain. Just sit with it. In stillness, in truth. And when you're ready to own that power, subscribe, because the next video will show you how to win without ever raising your voice.